Hello, y'all, and welcome back. So imagine you wake up in the morning, and in the first few minutes upon waking, you notice a small scratch on your left thumb. It's about an inch long. I apologize, I'll be using imperial measurements throughout this video, so with apologies to my friends in other countries who use the metric system, but it's about an inch long. It doesn't hurt, it's not bleeding, you can feel it when you touch your thumb. It's in no way a big deal, and you're not going to spend very much time thinking about it. You probably won't even mention it to anyone. But I guarantee you that one of the first things you're going to think when you see it, if not the actual first thing, is how did that get there? You'll think, did I get a paper cut? Did I cut myself preparing food? You'll wonder that, at least a little bit. Now let's up the stakes a little bit. So supposing first thing in the morning you step out the front door of your house or apartment or wherever you live, and you notice this enormous gash that's been carved in the ground, the road, say, in front of where you live. About 100 feet long, 10 feet wide, 20 feet deep. Huge, like a huge mechanical claw just like dug out the earth. Big deal. Scary, terrifying in many ways. But it also doesn't change in any way the fact that the first thing that you think is, how did that get there? The fundamental question you ask immediately upon encountering this phenomenon is the exact same one that you would ask upon encountering a small scratch in your thumb. And you are going to wonder this, how did that get there, with more intensity. I should think it's very psychologically understandable in as much as this thing is a much larger thing than a small scratch in your thumb. Very natural first question to ask. Now supposing, though, that the thing we're talking about is larger than a huge gash in the earth, supposing it's much larger, supposing it's the size of the universe. Now suppose it is the universe. Does this change in any way the first thing that you think upon encountering this thing? And the curious thing is, the answer to this question is, it actually does. Because while all of us would wonder about a scratch in our thumb or a car door or a big gash in the ground, many people go their entire lives, or at least enormous, swaths of their life, without ever asking, how did that get there about the universe? But that's a curious phenomenon, because if we ask this same question about smaller things, why wouldn't we ask it about the universe, the largest thing of all, indeed everything? This basic insight that we have, this desire to understand where something comes from, lies at the foundation of the argument we're going to be examining today, namely the cosmological argument for God's existence. The cosmological argument gets its name from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. The term topon really is often used to refer to the universe in Greek, but cosmos, meaning world, right, is the basic phenomenon we're trying to explain, namely the world, taken here not as the earth, but as everything that exists. How did that get there? So we begin from this phenomenon and ask how it got there. The cosmological argument is not one argument. Indeed, it's fair to say that it is many arguments. It is perhaps historically most closely associated with Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways, but even of the 5 ways, not all of them are versions of the cosmological argument. So what I'm going to be doing is presenting some versions of this argument that I understand best and see as most accessible in this video. So we'll start with a kind of premise-conclusion structure, a relatively kind of brief premise-conclusion version of the argument before getting into a slightly different dialectical method in subsequent videos. So the basic desire that we have to seek explanation for the existence of something undergirds the first premise of the version of the cosmological argument that I'll be presenting here, and that premise constitutes a principle which is known as the principle of sufficient reason. As I present it here, the principle of sufficient reason says every existing thing has an explanation for its existence. Every existing thing has an explanation for its existence, so that's the first premise. This basic principle, while it's usually unspoken, undergirds all science, all medicine, all technology, all human thought and inquiry, whatever. And it's something that we operate with on the basis, or we operate on this basis in everyday life all the time, right? Somebody comes to hang out with you and they smell like weed. They've either been smoking weed or they've been hanging out with someone who has. There's just no other possible explanation for it, right? People don't just randomly smell like that. This is just a kind of a silly example from everyday life, but the way our mind works is to seek explanation for phenomena just naturally because we know this to be true. First premise. Second premise. If the universe has an explanation for its existence, that explanation is God. Okay? If the universe has an explanation for its existence, that explanation is God. This is the second premise of the cosmological argument, as I'm presenting it here, of course. Now, at this point, some people might say, well, that escalated quickly, as we say. You have this sort of uncontroversial principle of sufficient reason, and now you're saying the explanation for the universe has to be God. But as we get further into the argument, you'll see that the first premise is actually, of the two, it actually is the more controversial. This second premise is less controversial than you might suppose. And this is true for a couple of reasons. So the naturalists that I talk to, including some that I'm very close friends with, tend to accept this, or at least they accept the logical concomitant of it. So Carl Sagan, the famous 20th century astronomer and atheist, said of the universe, cosmos is all there ever was, is, or will be. Meaning by this, he's sort of summing up his view of the universe, that the universe is just a brute fact. It's just there. We stand in awe of it, we can explore it, we can seek to understand parts of it, but you don't get an explanation for the whole thing. It's just a brute fact. There is no explanation for cosmos, right? So what this means is, right, since there is no God, there is no explaining thing. The desire that theists seem to have to explain the universe via appeal to this all-powerful being who created it is fundamentally mistaken. An atheist will then accept the logical equivalent of premise 2, so that logical equivalent being there is no God, therefore the universe has no explanation for its existence. This is pretty uncontroversial in my experience with atheists. And it's not hard to see why. If the universe does have an explanation for its existence, that explanation must be external to the universe. We'll get more into the reasoning behind this in future videos, or in the next video rather. It must be powerful enough to bring all of space and time into existence, and it must at some point have in fact brought all space and time into existence with some sort of purposive action, will, thought, command, decision, whatever. That already sounds way too much like God for the liking of an atheist, or at least the atheists with whom I have spoken. So this is going to be the second premise. If the universe has an explanation for its existence, that explanation is God. The third premise is the universe is an existing thing. The universe exists. This is, of course, not entirely uncontroversial, but it's mostly uncontroversial. It's, in my mind, I think, either very difficult or actually impossible to deny the existence of the universe. You could perhaps deny the existence of the universe external to yourself, but you still wouldn't succeed in denying the existence of the whole universe for different Cartesian reasons. We'll get into that. So we have these three premises. Once again, principle of sufficient reason. Every existing thing has an explanation for its existence. 2, if the universe has an explanation for its existence, that explanation is God. And 3, the universe is an existing thing. Logically, then, you see by 1 and 3, since the universe is an existing thing, and every existing thing has an explanation for its existence, we get premise 4, the universe has an explanation for its existence. It is one of the everythings referred to in premise 1. But by 2 and 4, right, the universe has an explanation for its existence. We saw this conditional in premise 2, if that's the case, then the explanation is God. We get 5, the explanation for the universe is God, which then yields 6, which would be the conclusion, namely God exists. For total logical completeness, you could add sort of a sub-premise that something can't be the explanation for anything, much less the universe, without existing, but at any rate, God exists. This, I say, is a very, very simple version of the cosmological argument. There are a number of different ways that you could challenge the different premises. Rather than do more with this premise conclusion version, I'll kind of take this as like a preliminary presentation of the argument, and we'll approach this same question from a slightly different angle in subsequent videos. I'll see you then.